and visiting local citizens' advice. I'm profoundly inspired by the commitment of the staff and volunteers wherever I go. There are as many different ways of running a citizens' advice as there are individual charities, but they all have certain things in common. And one of them is that many of the people we help interact with the legal system in many different ways. For some local citizens' advice, those who might be law centres as well as citizens' advice, it's a deep and existential connection. Others might support people in accessing legal advice in the community, more informally, helping people access pro bono support or highlighting where such support is available. But even those who don't have formal or informal connections to the legal profession will be helping people with the kinds of issues that all too often end up in court action of one kind or another, debt, housing issues, employment problems, discrimination. And not to mention our deep connection to the witness service, where we support witnesses in courts in England and Wales to give their best evidence. So what does that mean in practice? Well, it might mean, as in Citizens Advice Kensington and Chelsea, the development of a service delivered on site to inmates living and staff working in Wormwood Scrubs prison. Here we see common citizen advice areas such as welfare benefits, housing and debt take on an additional dimension due to the support that people need when they're incarcerated to prepare for release and rehabilitation. Or it might mean, as in Citizens Advice Stroud and Cotswolds, partnership with the local police and crime commissioner to deliver debt advice to women in refuges that supports victims of domestic abuse to deal with financial issues and move on to resettlement as quickly as possible. Or it might be individual pieces of casework which can make a huge difference to our clients, and in some cases establish precedents that will help many more. There are so many examples of this kind of work through our network, but I'll just highlight two today, which I think are indicative of the breadth of legal work which happens in the network. The first is at Kirklees Citizens Advice and Law Centre, who recently supported a client to gain a landmark judgment in the Court of Appeal, which exposed bad practice at HMRC. A client sought to review an error made in processing a tax credit claim, but was blocked from pursuing an independent appeal because of changes made to the process by the government's use of Henry VIII powers. As the presiding judge noted, it took 2 tribunal decisions and the immediate prospect of a hearing in court of appeal for the facts of the case to be properly investigated. The second example is in Citizens Advice Liverpool, where a social landlord withdrew their eviction case against one of our clients, having been challenged on their compliance with the public sector equality duty and on their adherence to the pre-action protocol. This work was enabled by the Access to Justice Foundation's Improving Outcomes Through Legal Support programme. They're just 2 examples from the most recent months of the clear benefits that partnership between our sectors can bring, and I'm delighted to be here today to help deepen that partnership. So I've been in Citizens Advice nearly 3 years, and since day one, it's felt like there's been very little respite for our staff and volunteers. I joined midway through the coronavirus pandemic in April 2021, and as well as the appalling cost of the pandemic in terms of lives and illness, both the pandemic itself and the measures to fight it wrought huge changes on people's daily lives. This in turn had an impact on the advice that people needed, and it had a dislocating effect on many of our services who had to rapidly transition to new ways of being there for people. And no sooner had the pandemic receded than the cost of living crisis swept in. Back in November 2021, we published our first report that forecast the coming challenges of the cost of living crisis. 2 and a bit years on, we've hit the grim milestone of having helped 400,000 people with crisis support. That's people who need access to a food bank or to charitable funding. Well over half of those people had a disability or a long-term health condition. 1 in 4 is a single parent. It's been a cost of living crisis that has hit everyone, but it has not hit everyone equally. And it will always be the least equipped to bounce back who will bear the brunt of the long-term consequences. Things have eased somewhat. The energy price cap will fall at the end of this month, but it's still higher than it was at the start of the crisis, and there's less support available to people. It's really important that we don't mistake the lessening of media and political attention on the issue as meaning that the problem has gone away. Underpinning this surge in crisis support is something that we call negative budgets. It's a trend we've been watching for some time, and essentially it just measures the proportion of people whose income does not cover their essential outgoings. We have very detailed information about the finances of people who come to us for debt advice, and we know that throughout 2023, over half of those who came to us for debt advice were in a negative budget. And that's a figure that's risen steadily over the cost of living crisis. Just a few weeks ago, we published the results of some work we've been doing to model the scale of that problem in the population more broadly. And the findings were shocking. 5 million people, including 1.5 million children, live in a household that's in a negative budget. And another nearly 2.5 million people are living on empty. So they're only escaping a negative budget by cutting back their essential spending below unsafe levels. It's worth pausing on those numbers. That means over 7 million people institutionally do not have enough money coming in each month to safely pay their essential bills. And that leads to situations as it did for Jane in Oxfordshire, a single mother. If she works overtime, she earns around £1,400 a month. She receives some benefits, but from that she has to pay all of her expenses, and just her rent in a social housing property has recently risen to £1,000 a month. So you can see how quickly people's finances get out of kilter. And sadly, but entirely unsurprisingly, that means she's now struggling to pay back any arrears while under a suspended possession order. She quickly fell behind on her council tax too, and she's now liable to pay the whole year's bill. So it's very likely that enforcement agent action is soon going to follow. And that's just one example of how the structural problem of negative budgets can devastate lives and further pile pressure onto a legal system already bursting at the seams. We see the impact of this on our data in a whole host of areas that have had or will have impacts on the legal system. In 2023, we helped a record number of people with Section 21, no-fault evictions, and in January 2024, we helped more people than ever before with homelessness issues. In one sense, it's profoundly shocking. In another, it could hardly be less surprising. Our research reveals that a private renter in a negative budget spends almost 3/4 of their total income on rent and energy. And with impossible margins like these to navigate, it's inevitable that people will face these terrible consequences. The amount of debt that people owe has increased. The average amount our debt clients owe is up 46% compared with before the pandemic. On rental, debt is up 26%. People's debts are rising and they have fewer resources to pay them off. So we're proud to help as many people as we do. Over 2.5 million people get one-to-one advice from us each year, and many millions more self-serve advice from our website. But we know there are many who need our help who can't get through. Demand is rising, but at a time when central and local government funding for advice provision is either flat or falling in the face of other financial pressures, it gets harder every year to meet demand. This will be a familiar problem, I'm sure, to many of you. The justice system is and has been for some time under huge pressure. I know that this question of unmet legal need is one of the subjects that you'll be touching on later today. And our own internal evidence shows just how extensive the problem is. In the last year alone, our website page on how to find free legal advice was viewed over 200,000 times, the most popular of all our legal pages. So, as I'm wont to do when I speak at conferences like this, I'm afraid I've painted a fairly bleak picture of the scale of the challenges that we face, and I make no apology for that. I think there's a huge power in facing up to these problems, recognizing them for what they are, and really working together to see how we can address them. It's only by doing so that we can recognize some of the ways in which we can try to affect them. And to be clear, I think there are things that we can do together to help tackle some of these problems. The resourcing challenges faced by advice providers up and down the country have been and continue to be very difficult to face up to. But as our relationship to historic funders and partners changes, there's a new energy around a desire to build relationships and partnerships. Partnerships that are founded in the fundamental tenets of Citizens Advice as a charity. We're led by people's real needs. What do they need at the point of crisis? But also, what's got them to this point? We always try to see the whole person and to help with the totality of these problems. If I could ask one thing of those of you attending today, it's to go back to your communities, and if you aren't already in conversation with your local citizens advice, start one now. We have innovative projects across the whole of our network in the justice space. These are things which come up, they're seeded by the local communities in which our local citizens advice are embedded. So if you're a commissioner, I hope you walk away from today and recognise the importance of advice provision within frontline services to reduce legal needs. If you're a legal service provider, might you consider pro bono support for citizens advice in your area? Our staff and volunteers are hugely skilled, but nearly 3/4 of our local offices say they would value better advice and support with employment, with family and housing cases that they work on. If you're willing to think creatively about what you may be able to do to help tackle some of the challenges we face as a society, we will do likewise. One of the core strengths of citizens advice is the link between the advice we give and the advocacy we're able to do. So we have a lovely feedback loop. We see people, we see individual problems. We have very good data, which means we can translate that into big insights about what's happening and identify policy solutions that respond to those problems. And going upstream with those issues is one of the things that helps us deal with a situation in which we are unlikely to have all of the resources that we need and would like to be able to tackle every individual issue. The new commitment that we've made to commit to prevention is encapsulated in the purpose statement that we've developed as an organisation. We exist to shape a society where people face far fewer problems. And there's a very concrete example of how that might work in the legal space. Many of you will be aware of the controversy over the forced installation of prepayment meters. Our own evidence and a subsequent undercover investigation by the Times revealed many instances of energy companies disregarding the rules which are supposed to protect vulnerable customers when forcibly installing prepayment meters. That was a scandal that drew in the legal sector too. At the height of the cost of living crisis in 2022, magistrates approved more than 1,000 warrants a day as an almost industrial system that could not plausibly have provided the level of scrutiny required to make the system safe. I think it's safe to say no magistrate chose to give their time through a desire to bulk approve such harmful measures, but it touches on ethical issues, which I know, again, will be discussed later in the day. Rightly, the senior presiding judge of England and Wales placed a moratorium on these cases in February 2023, but only after an estimated 600,000 people were forced onto a prepayment meter for debt in 2022. Following this scandal, new tougher rules were put in place on prepayment meters. But we're increasingly worried that as energy firms find themselves less able to use prepayment meters as a method of redress, they might further exploit court-based action to chase down debts. The time to tackle this is now, not after the horse has bolted. At a time when 5 million people have fallen behind on their bills through no fault of their own and with no resources to pay it back, I'd urge everyone working in the legal profession to join with organisations like ours to identify and draw attention to these kinds of problems. It's an unfortunate truth that without coordinated and concerted action from advocates like us, people's problems tend to drift to the most acute, the most expensive and the most harmful place for resolution. And that's something that we all need to be vigilant about. So I should be in the reasons to be optimistic section of the speech here, and I'm conscious that none of what I've said to date is particularly motivational. But there are definitely green shoots, particularly in the regulatory space. After a decidedly rocky start to the energy crisis, Ofgem is now showing far greater willingness to act early. In the financial services space, the new FCA Consumer Duty makes the responsibility with institutions to deliver good outcomes for customers and avoid foreseeable harm. This idea of a duty on companies to act in the customer's interest is something we're looking at in other markets, particularly energy. There's more to be done. Green shoots aren't going to solve all the problems, not least when government itself shows fairly lamentable practice in some of its debt collection practices. But it's an important starting place to build on. A key theme of today's conference is about facing the future. And I think one of the questions we're going to be returning to is, what will legal services look like in 10 years? There's plenty of expertise in the room to answer that question more fully. But just a few thoughts from my experience. The legal services sector and the advice sector have faced and will continue to face similar challenges. We're all for us now, for example, long practiced in the art of being asked to do more for less. And some of the sources of future disruption are common to us. We're seeing the emergence of new commissioning geographies as devolution proceeds at different paces in different parts of the country. We're also seeing a big step change in the capabilities of artificial intelligence. So AI, which I'm sure will come up, it comes up everywhere. It creates opportunities to work more efficiently and effectively, which could ultimately help fill the demand challenge. But it also creates risks that need to be thought about. We're very interested in algorithmic bias, the accuracy and bias problems. For example, we found that people from ethnic minorities are often charged more for car insurance, despite all the risk factors being the same, a finding that insurers have been unable to explain. I'm conscious that I'm getting the signals that say my time is up. There's more things that I could say, but I think the most important thing, just to finish on, we, the advice sector, and you, the legal sector, help people for whom a relationship problem can become a money problem, which can become a debt problem, which can become a housing problem, which can become a homeless problem. It's very much about, you know, people with interconnected problems. And I think I just finish on the importance of seeing people in the round, seeing problems in the round, and really taking a holistic approach. Thank you.